Hello, and welcome to episode number 10 of your Balkan Week. This week, I would like to talk about the war in Ukraine, with an emphasis on how the war in Ukraine is going to affect politics and political relations in the states of Southeast Europe, in the Balkans. I think one thing we can say generally about the war, and this was visible from the beginning, was that the invasion was the product of a very large miscalculation on the part of Russia. They imagined that Europe would become divided over whether to support or oppose their activity, and that they would be able to gain political advantage out of this, that the political weakness of Europe would be shown. In fact, Europe was politically more weak before the invasion than after, and the invasion galvanized Europe, creating a new political situation, especially in states that are recent members, candidate members, or aspirational members of the European Union. So let's take a look at what's happening in a few of those states. First, why don't we take a look at a couple of the states that have made a point and have made a point for a while, at least since their current governments have come in office, um, of emphasizing their orientation toward the so-called West, toward the United States, toward the European Union, and against Russia, to the degree that we can describe politics in Europe as a competition between those forces. Um, for Kosovo, there is going to be a clear diplomatic advantage in underlining and emphasizing and repeating this orientation, and we're already able to see some signs of this. In Macedonia, the advantage is internal. This allows the governing Social Democratic Party to score points against its opponents in the formerly ruling party of Nikola Gruevski. Their advantage is going to be internal. They are able to portray themselves as the party that is advancing the national interest. Let's look also at states where there is contestation over the international orientation of the states. I think if we want to look at states like Slovenia and Bulgaria, ones where there is a very divided political community, we can see the competition playing out. Many efforts on the part of uh, of governments and parties that had been associated with Russian power to move away from that, and competition for advantage over who is supporting the more advantageous alliance. You're also seeing, as you are seeing in some other states, expressions of both pro-Ukrainian and anti-Ukrainian sentiment in the public sphere. In Croatia, there was an interesting movement in the period leading up to the war when the president, Zoran Milanovic, although nominally a social democrat, had been cultivating a close relation both with Russia and with the Russian sponsored separatists in Bosnia and Herzegovina, the ones who identify themselves with both Croat and Serb nationality. Milanovic has clearly come out as the loser of this competition, and that effort to try to build close relationships with Russia in Croatia appears to be at the very least at a standstill, if not over. And we can look at Bosnia and Herzegovina, where a lot of the orientation toward the war seems to divide up um, along the lines of national parties, with national parties representing both the Serb and Croat groups in name, aligning themselves with Russia to their at least temporary disadvantage. That is to say, this is a moment in Bosnia and Herzegovina where the competition between East and West, to the degree that it's important there, can be used to build an advantage against the parties that are working for the destruction of the state. But it needs to be emphasized that this advantage is temporary. It has to be either used or the opportunity will pass. Um, and if the opportunity does pass, then once again we'll be in the position in which Russian power is able to play a spoiler toward any efforts to try to consolidate or reform or improve conditions in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Finally, the third category we can look at are states that have and are confronting and dealing with a legacy of strong orientation toward Russia in international policy. Those would be Montenegro and Serbia. And Montenegro, I think, it's not necessarily that big an issue, and it's partly not that big an issue because the fight has already been fought. and Montenegro has to a certain extent aligned itself, with the exception of some parties. In Serbia, however, Serbia has made an effort to play both sides in this war to its own disadvantage, and it's probably the case that the European Union and the United States were fairly indulgent toward Vucic's non-participation in European foreign policy in the period leading up to the elections that happened last week, and that now in the post-election period they're going to be expecting a reversal, and he doesn't have many reasons not to make a reversal. He has to go against public opinion, but he controls the media. So we could see the first gesture in this in Serbia's vote with the majority in the General Assembly in the United Nations to suspend Russia from the Human Rights Council. Now, Serbia had voted positively on a non-binding resolution before, but this is the first time you've seen Serbia voting in the United Nations on a motion that has actual material consequences. Vucic will be expecting a reward from this, and given the sort of wishy-washy policy of the European Union, he will probably get an award for this. But there's a larger context here. Look, there were elections last week in Hungary and in Serbia with results that were, to say the least, um, disheartening, and parties associated with a pro-Russian policy were re-elected in power. We don't know what's going to happen in France in a couple of days when they have their election. Now, this I think shows a couple of things. One of the things that it shows is something that we already know, and that is that political parties in power are very, very rarely either rewarded or punished for positions they take on international policy. This perception that the big debate in any state in the world is over whether the state should be pro Europe or pro Russia is a perception that comes from outside. It's not confirmed by evidence from inside those states. But I think that another thing that it shows is that although a moment has come that has led to a degree of political unity and political will in Europe that has not existed for a good many years, we still have to see the willingness to take advantage of this moment and to create and to consolidate some political gains on the basis of it.